Hello and welcome to our Restory Podcast, Stories from the Past, Ideas for the Future, Episode 1. In this podcast series, we bring together researchers working at the intersection of cultural heritage, history, and community development. In each episode, we explore the stories behind the research, how communities remember, how cultural heritage evolves, and what lessons from the past can help us in imagining more sustainable future for our communities. That's the main goal of our podcast. And this podcast is part of the Restory project, which brings together researchers and community development experts from 12 countries, from 20 partner organizations, and all led by Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. The project runs between 2024 and 2026, and it's funded by European Commission under the Horizon European Program. This is the last year of this wonderful project, so the moment when the research is almost ready, is ready to be anyway shared with the communities, and this podcast is just one of the tools that we use to share what we learned so far in the last 2 years. Before starting, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Paula Beudean, an organizational and community facilitator at C.School, a Romanian education-oriented company, a partner in the Restory project, and honored to be the host of this podcast. Some house rules before we start, and I will introduce our host today. Some house rules. So I'm going to ask the people that are on Zoom with us to keep their microphone mute, to keep their cameras off, so that Facebook will get only the image of our guest when he's talking, and we're going to address any thoughts, any questions that you're going to have at the end of this podcast in the last 5 to 10 minutes. And I will ask you to write them in the chat. I'm going to follow the chat and try to coordinate the meeting for all of us. Thank you so much. Now, today's host is today's host. Today's guest is Professor Guðmundur Hálfdanarson. I hope I pronounced it correctly. I did my best.
More or less.
More or less. I'm still learning Icelandic. Who is a professor emeritus of history at the University of Iceland. He studied history and archaeology at the University of Lund in Sweden and at the University of Iceland, and completed a doctoral degree at Cornell University in 1991. He specializes in European social and intellectual history, with special emphasis on the history of nationalism, the formation of identities, cultural heritage, and cultural memory, of course. Welcome, and thank you so much for accepting to be my guest and my first guest of our Restory podcast. And I hope I can call you from now to make it easier for the podcast. Guðmundur.
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to be rather informal in Iceland, so please call me by my first name.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So welcome, and I don't know if you want to say something else that I didn't say about you and you want to add to the short presentation I made. I'm happy to, happy to listen.
Just thank you for organizing this. It has been really a pleasure to work in this project. It has been eye-opening to meet people from so many different parts of Europe. So it's really a pleasure to be the first one in this series. It's hopefully will be more people who are introducing their research in the next few weeks.
I do hope so by the end of the year to have as many as possible researchers in this podcast. I thank you once again for being here, and I will start with a warm-up question before going into the topic of our podcast. I'm going to start with this warm-up question. From your perspective as a researcher in social history, history of nationalism, and formation of identities, all this expertise that you managed to gather in all these years of work, seeing the wisdom, around you, hopefully. I'm asking you, if you were to give advice to the newer generations in these so uncertain times that we are living today, what would be your advice for them?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have been active in European projects now for quite a long time. And what I have found so interesting in working in these projects is to see how differently history is understood, learned, and recited in different parts of Europe, how many entangled histories we have, how many different ways we look at the same events and processes in different parts of Europe. So my advice would be that for everyone to remember that history is a very serious business. It is not something that is to be taken lightly. But we also have to always remember to look at our history with critical eyes, and to remember that we all, in a sense, although we have written our histories, it is not set in stone. We always have to look at it with the idea that it can be reinterpreted, understood to deal with the different times that we live in. So be vigilant, be critical, but also remember that we do have history, and history matters.
Yes, history is there. So first lesson, history is very important. It's a serious business. I would not expect different from a historian, but I'm pretty sure that the young people will listen to this, the younger generation. And yes, but as you said, critical thinking, I think, is the most important part in any aspect of our life, but especially when we interact with all the speeches and discourses that we listen to these days. Now, I will move into, if you agree, we can move into the topic of our podcast, which is the Thingvellir National Park as a cultural heritage space or landscape. But to help the audience to understand a bit what is Thingvellir National Park, I will share first a video that I randomly found actually on YouTube. It's a short one. I looked into to be short, but just to help people visualize what's the place that we're talking about. And then I'm going to come back to you. So let's see this short video that we have here. Okay. Here. And just want to make sure that we also have the sound for it. And now we can.
We've just arrived at Thingvellir National Park. I am so excited to see this natural wonder. Thingvellir National Park is the spectacular site of Iceland's first parliament. This is also the place where people gather together for important events. How cool is it that I'm walking between North America on one side and Europe on the other? These wide open landscapes are like nothing I've ever seen before. Lake Thingvellir is the largest natural lake in Iceland. Around it you can see the cracks and faults where the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates meet. These plates move apart at a rate of about 1 inch per year, so Iceland is actually growing. With its wealth of geographical and historical significance, Thingvellir National Park truly is one of Iceland's national treasures.
Okay, this was the video. And I was sharing earlier with Guðmundur, and now I can share also with our guest here that since we started to work on our podcast, my Instagram is full of reels about Thingvellir National Park, and most of the videos are about the two tectonic plates that are meeting there. So now I want to know more about your perspective, what this place is, where it is, and why it's relevant for Iceland and Iceland people.
Okay, so first I have to correct the woman in this kind of touristic video that it is true that the tectonic plates are going apart in Þingvellir, but they're about 3 or 4 kilometers or even more between the ridge. You cannot really touch, you cannot stand in America and Europe at the same time. You would have to be a very big giant to do that. And the fact is that Þingvellir is not seen in Iceland as a natural cultural heritage, but as a cultural heritage only. And the fact is that Þingvellir, what makes Þingvellir important in Iceland was the fact that at Þingvellir, this is a place about 50 kilometers to the east of the present capital in Reykjavik. Þingvellir was a place in the 10th century, around 930, that Icelandic chieftains kind of gathered to form a thing, which is a kind of assembly in the kind of Germanic tribal history. For the whole country, it served as a court, but also a meeting place for the chieftains of the whole island. So Iceland is big with not many people. Iceland is larger than Ireland, and it's the second largest island in Europe, but only with less than 400,000 people. So in a sense, a gathering of chieftains coming to this particular spot was a major kind of event in Iceland history. So in the beginning, this was a kind of assembly and a court. And this kind of created the idea of the first Icelandic parliament. I also have to deconstruct the idea of a parliament. It was not a parliament. It was not
a real one, as we have today.
It was not a democratic body. Iceland does not have the oldest parliament in Europe. Icelandic parliament, with the name of Alþingi, was founded in the mid-19th century. Carries the same name, but this was a totally different institution. It was also an institution that changed through time. In the beginning, it was, as I say, the kind of assembly for the chieftains coming from all parts of Iceland. But in the 13th century, Iceland became part of the Norwegian monarchy, and gradually, and later in the Danish monarchy, and gradually this was a meeting of royal officials coming to discuss the kind of government of Iceland, which was controlled from Denmark. So in a sense, it has a very long history because Alþingi was operated from 930 or around 930. We decided in 1930 that to celebrate the millennium, we had to have a fixed year. It's not entirely sure which year it was, but around that time. And it met in Þingvellir until at the end of the 18th century. Every year, 2, 3, 4 weeks in the summer, and that's it. But what was particular with Þingvellir was that, as this was not a fixed place in the sense that there were no buildings there, there was no permanent institutions there. People just met there for a few weeks in the summer. And so there are no kind of, neither really archaeological and absolutely no buildings there to kind of reminding us of what happened. So if you come to Þingvellir, you will come to a place which is really a spectacular landscape. You can see the vistas. It is striking, I must say. But at the same time, there is no remnants of its historical of its history. So in a sense, the history has to be in your mind. You have to imagine it. So
you have to know about it. Yes.
Yeah.
So the story of the place, basically, we know about the place and what the place was from the stories that you can find, I imagine, in recordings, that are kept since then, but not on the ground. This is what I understood. So in a sense, this is my next question for you. So how come it became a cultural heritage? If when we go there, if it's nature what we see more than other artifacts, let's say from the past. So why not a natural heritage? how did it become a cultural heritage and under UNESCO patronage in the end?
Yeah, that's a good question, because but the reason is that, as I say, the Alþingi was abolished at the end of the 18th century. So in the mid 19th century, in the 1840s, there became a discussion of Iceland should have its own kind of elected assembly as a part of political reforms in Denmark at the time. And then the discussion was, where should that parliament be? And some people thought, most Icelanders thought it should be in Þingvelli, because that was the kind of political and cultural center of the Icelandic identity. But the officials who had remembered how it was to be there in the summers, in the rain and in the bad weather, they wanted to be in Reykjavik, because they could stay in houses. So in a sense, Þingvelli became this kind of cultural center, the center of Icelandic historical identity, a place where people met to discuss all kinds of things. In a sense, it became a kind of politically free space of the kind of intellectual national space where the nation could gather to be united. Because in democracies, we tend to not to be united. We quarrel. We have different opinions. We have political parties with quite various and different ideas of how to govern. But Þingvelli was always kept as a place where we came together. So in a sense, in the 20th century and until now, its main function has been, in addition to be a tourist place, as we discussed later on, it became the kind of ceremonial place. So we had these kind of national festivals, remembering certain turning points in the history of the nation, and it became a kind of a stage for the play, where I have written that it became like we were putting the kind of national contract, the kind of the social contract on stage. Parliament met there. It discussed something that everyone agreed on. It was sometimes difficult to find anything that we agreed on, with the nation kind of assembled around it. So the last of these kind of, one of the last festival was in 1994 when Iceland celebrated its 50th anniversary of its republic, which had been founded in this very same spot. And this about 60,000 people came to the place. It was at that time, about 20% of the Icelandic population gathered there to look at Parliament pass a law that with absolutely no consequence, because everyone could raise their hand. So in a sense, Þingvelli became this kind of central place for Icelandic national identity. So in 1972, UNESCO came up with the World Heritage Convention, which was the kind of convention, the rules about which later led to the institution of World Heritage Sites. So in a sense, UNESCO decides which places in the world have a universal value as cultural heritage places. And Iceland only became part of this convention in 1995, but already in the 1980s they had begun to discuss that maybe Iceland should, sign this convention. And from the beginning, the idea was that Þingvelli would be the first place that would be inscribed on a list from Iceland. And it was never discussed as a natural kind of natural heritage site. It was a cultural heritage site. That's the way in which it was understood in Iceland. It was the first Iceland National Park, but it was always, the idea was that it is because Alþingi met there, because the nation was in a sense, as one very well-known Icelandic literary scholar said, the nation was born in Þingvelli.
So a place of meeting in the end for everyone that felt part of the nation.
Yeah, in a sense.
And that's how it became the cultural heritage, representing the way in which nation came together.
Yeah, and how the kind of different individuals who form the nation can come there and kind of feel that this is a historical place, that this is a place, as I say, where the nation was born, through this kind of becoming not only people living in Iceland, but also people feeling that they had something in common, and formulating this nation. Mm-hmm. Which, as a historian, I know is a total misconception of Alþingi in the past, but this is the way in which it was interpreted in the Romantic era of 19th century, and later in the kind of more nationalistic struggles of the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm. I will just go back a bit to the, what it means to be part of the UNESCO heritage, to be under this umbrella of protected heritage. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that, okay, it has, when you are under this patronage, you have many benefits. It gives you, the power to preserve the places, the power to preserve the monuments, or the power to preserve the stories that we have from the past, and also give you access to funds, for instance, to be able to do all this work of preservation. From your perspective, would there some disadvantages as well? Mm-hmm. In when we make decisions, especially of preserving certain cultural heritage. So if we were to balance benefits with disadvantages, what is your perspective on that?
Yes, I mean, when they started to discuss if Iceland should join this convention and if they should then apply for the inscription of Þingvellir into this to become a World Heritage Site, the committee that kind of governs, so there's a committee that governed the national park, and still is. It's a parliamentary committee, and which has the kind of authority, the kind of national authority over the park. When they started to discuss this in the late 1980s, they were hesitant, because they said, if we have Þingvellir inscribed into the as a World Heritage Site, we will lose some authority. The authority will go from Iceland to this kind of international body, and they thought that was a little bit scary. I mean, this is a national heritage, so they were quite hesitant about that. But then they thought maybe we get some money for it. I mean, maybe get some funds, which in the sense became very quickly, they saw that they didn't get any funds, because UNESCO doesn't work that way. For UNESCO, for a nation that should be absolutely capable of preserving its own heritage without any financial help. Iceland is a rich country, and so we have to pay for it ourselves. But to be in this list, it gives you certain advantages. It becomes known. It becomes well known. It increases tourism. But also, it was also a help for those who wanted to preserve the place, because there were debates on how to administer this place. Mm-hmm. For example, when Iceland applied for the place to be inscribed into the World Heritage List, one of the kind of the criticism that came from the kind of the expert bodies, that there are two expert bodies that come and inspect the place, and for UNESCO. And one of the things that they criticized was the fact that there was a lot of trees there, where kind of had been planted there, trees that are not natural for Iceland. And there we have two different views of nature kind of competing, because planting trees in Iceland in the 19th and early 20th century was seen as a patriotic duty, because mm-hmm. there were obviously almost no trees in Iceland. So tree planting was seen as very positive. And of course, they planted these trees in Þingvellir, in this really magnificent place that was this kind of national center. But UNESCO thought that was odd, because these trees kind of contradicted this kind of authenticity of the place as a natural spot. So this was another thing was that it had become very sought after to have summer houses in the national park. And UNESCO said, no, that's not good. You're not allowed to have summer houses in the park. It has to be totally void of that kind of
keep it as it was.
yeah, exactly, to be authentic. So in a sense, and this had been criticized, both of these things had been criticized in Iceland. So becoming a UNESCO site, it became then the strength in the hand of those who were against this kind of change of the place, wanted to preserve the kind of natural authenticity and of the place. So I think that is the main advantage, for the kind of preservation of the place, is that you get certain rules that you have to follow. You cannot do whatever you want to, and but money, UNESCO does not give you any money to do it. You have to do it on your own, but you have to follow the rules in order to sustain this kind of label of being World Heritage Site.
Well, it doesn't give you the money, but it gives you the opportunity to find money maybe in other places, funding sources, because this is a UNESCO heritage. And basically, when you have the label, then some money will follow that label of UNESCO. But definitely, there are also disadvantages, not just benefits. And disadvantages means it's also burden. You need to make sure that you have the resources to manage the site and so on, and also to market it. Maybe for that they chose the way to market it as the meeting of two continents and so on. And of course, also to keep it as it was, you need to understand, okay, how the society will change in the future, what the needs of your society will be in the future, and then if this cultural heritage, the way it was preserved, and it has to be preserved, will help the development of that society. And I'll make this here a bridge with my next question for you about the cultural heritage role, because what I understood from your presentation so far is that Fiktmalair National Park, it was, before it was the place for meeting, where the nation met, where the people, part of different tribes at the beginning, then part of the nation itself, they met, and it was the place where the nation was born. Then it was accepted under the culture, under the UNESCO, and became a global, from a national heritage, it became a global, a universal, cultural heritage. And if we put all this together to the way in which the Iceland society changed in the last 40, 50 years, 30 years, I don't know, I'm thinking now, what would be the role of this park now for the current society, and what could be the role for a future society? What is your take on this?
These are fascinating questions and very important ones. I come to cultural heritage studies through my interest in nationalism and the kind of idea of national identities. And in a sense, heritage is the foundation of identity formation. These kind of heritage places, they become centers for identity formation. This is our place. It belongs to us. And then we have to define who we are and what is the group that owns these places. And there are different types of heritage and different types of heritage discourses. And you can say heritage, even if it is kind of located in a certain place, it is a site, it is a building, it's a book, it is a story, it is some kind of practice. It is always it is not a place in such, it is a discussion about it that makes it a heritage. It is what we say about it, how we understand it, how we interpret that particular thing, site or practice. So in a sense, there are different ways of interpreting these things. It can come from above through experts, and that's clear. I think there is is an example, a kind of example of a place that is formulated through kind of authoritative heritage discourse, to use the terminology by Laura Jane Smith. It is something that is experts defined it, historians, literary critics, the state, and then UNESCO through its expert bodies. So this is one form of heritage. Other form, it's a heritage that is to kind of unify large bodies, nations, or all humanity. But heritage can also be for the small communities. It can also be to kind of as a counter narrative to the kind of larger narratives of the state, where experts do not take a part, which is kind of locally produced and seen as when we are the small community that has this heritage. So in the case of Þingvellir, it has never been a kind of community heritage, because there is really no community there. It is not. It is, as you could see it from the picture, it's not a place where many people live. I mean, it's mostly rock and water, and it was never a very rich agricultural area. It was chosen in the 10th century because it was easily accessible in that times of communication. The funny thing is that when they decided to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Republic in 1994, that had changed drastically, because it was very difficult for people to get there because the roads were all clogged. So it was called, the joke was that this was not a national festival, this was a national road festival, because so many people were stuck on the roads. But in a sense, so this was this kind of, as I say, it was not a local community that had it, it was an Icelandic national community. But with UNESCO label, it becomes a universal heritage. So in a sense, we have this kind of conflicting or not, maybe not conflicting, but at least contradictory interpretation of Þingvellir as being this national heritage or a universal heritage. And one then can ask oneself, what is a universal heritage? Is that something that is possible? But in the last few years, it has really become a tourist place owned by the tourists, and it has become a tourist destination in this kind of area, this era of mass tourism. So I think these different ways of looking at heritage tells you that heritage is always living thing. It is not something that is defined once and for all. And as you were indicating before, the Icelandic nation has changed a lot. I often quote the former president of Iceland, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who describing Þingvellir. So she said, "It was only in the heart of an Icelander that all of its nature is interwoven with an eventful history. And when Icelanders visit the site, their minds instinctively wander to encounter the people who once inhabited the country, struggling century after century toward an uncertain future." So what she is saying, that that's only Icelander who can feel the history when he or she comes there.
Place.
But that might be the case if you look back in time when we can imagine that all Icelanders could trace their history back to the past. But nowadays, about 20%, 25% of Icelanders were not born in Iceland, they are immigrants. There has been an explosion in immigration in recent decades. And how can this site, this historical site, be a unifying symbol for Icelanders in the modern contemporary times? I think that is something that we haven't really figured out. And this is one of the challenges that European societies are dealing with. More or less all European societies, especially societies who are based on this kind of fiction that we are all, in some sense, form organic nationality, that there is something that is organic about nationality, that the nation is not an historical invention, but is kind of like a natural community. That was very much the idea in Iceland until very recently, and in many ways it still is. And then a symbol like Þingvellir becomes, instead of being this kind of unifying symbol, becomes a kind of divisive symbol. And I think that would be a shame, because it is. I mean, the symbols that are supposed to unify, if they become dividing symbols, they don't have any function anymore. And then we really need to rethink cultural heritage if it becomes like that.
Yes. Just to go into our, because we kept our audience in suspense so far. So to go to our question, because it really connects to what you actually described before. It's a place of whose heritage is Þingvellir National Park, because you mentioned the Icelanders, of course, which they will feel the place. They will feel in a special way that maybe me as a Romanian, if I'm visiting, I will not feel it. I don't know. Who knows? Then we have the migrants, people that decided to move and live their life in Iceland. And then we have the tourists, that are coming and going, coming and leaving. And they also go and visit this place. Probably they will not connect it, but still they are predominant using the place, in comparison with Icelanders, which I don't imagine they go every day or, every month to visit the place. So whose heritage is Þingvellir National Park? We should decide today. I'm kidding.
So in many ways, I think, it has been voted by the tourists that this is a natural heritage. It is not a cultural heritage. A colleague of mine who was actually the president of Iceland for 8 years, but returned after he stopped being president and continued to be my colleague. And he told me that he last summer he served as a volunteer, a guide in Þingvellir, and so he was talking to people, tourists that came there, and of course they found it very exciting that the former president was talking to them, and so he was asking them, about Þingvellir, what they thought Þingvellir was. No one had any idea about the history, had any interest in it, and they all came to stand on each side of this rift. Yeah. And he said, okay, I was not correcting them. Let them just believe what they believe. Fine. So in a sense, I think, like all heritage is something that you have to interpret and reinterpret. Heritage is not the site. Heritage is what you think about the site, what you talk about the site, and that is changing. And it's clear. I think nowadays, for most Icelanders, they wouldn't be able to remember anything of this history. I wrote an article. I wrote an article analyzing the festival in 1994, and there I said that people came there together to remember. They remember together. They knew that they were remembering something. They just didn't remember what it was. So they had the feeling that they were standing there remembering something. And there was this kind of remembrance, was this kind of unifying feeling. But most of them had no idea what they were remembering. They didn't remember what I think it was.
It was something about unifying.
Yeah. So the kind of process of remembering. So I think basically the history of the place can go. I mean, the history is history, but as a heritage, it needs to be, if it's going to serve as a national heritage, national cultural heritage, it has to be inclusive. It cannot be that it's only in our hearts. People have some kind of genetic connection with the place that had forefathers or foremothers who assembled there in the past. If that is the case, then it cannot serve as a national heritage. So hopefully it will develop, and we are lucky that it is spectacular. The landscape is spectacular. If the fields of Alþingi had been, just a grassy field, it wouldn't be remembered anymore. But So
it has a story. The grass has a story.
Yeah, it has a story, but it's not spectacular in a sense. So.
Yeah, it's a place of meeting for sure. If it's the
Yeah.
meeting of two tectonic plates or is the meeting of people, it's a place of meeting for sure. As we're approaching the end of this conversation, I cannot believe that the time flies so fast. I will invite the people that are here in the Zoom with us if they want to address some questions in the chat. But still then, until they think and maybe they write their questions here, if you were to, let's say, to conclude, to think of, I don't know, 2-3 things that we should share with the communities in general as things they should take into consideration when they make decisions about cultural heritage preservation. Learning from this case study that you researched and you wrote, what will be those 2-3 lessons, let's say, if you would like to share, or maybe questions that they should ask themselves before making these, important decision about cultural heritage preservation?
First of all, you have to understand and define and determine what is the heritage, what is to be preserved, and you also and then you have to understand and remember that heritage has to be a living thing. If heritage becomes frozen, if it becomes just a preserved building without any kind of feelings of emotions, it is going to be it's going to die. It's not going to be a heritage. It has to have some kind of living practice associated with it. In the case of Þingvellir, it is the tourism that has become that kind of new way of understanding the place. Secondly, you have also, if you have a heritage, you have to remember whose heritage is it. Who are we who, in a sense, see this as our heritage? Because if someone inherited something, then it is clearly connected with the past in a sense. It's one generation that inherits something from the generation before. So in a sense, this has to be, if it's a heritage, it has to be kind of connected with some kind of group. And in many places, this is very much debated. I've been in Transylvania, and I see how heritage is a contested thing, because there are so many different cultural communities that live together, sometimes in harmony, sometimes not. So this is also very important for everyone who is looking at heritage to remember. And finally, how is it used? Mm-hmm. How is the heritage used? Do we preserve it as a frozen image of the past, or do we see it as a living thing in the present? So, as I said before, Þingvellir, in a sense, where the tourists have taken it over, and I think that's, in my mind, it's a very positive thing. I mean, I'm very glad that so many people come there and visit it. It is not seen as a holy ground that has to be. It's not like a closed holy place. It is open to everyone to come and visit. And for me, that is very positive. It in a sense, it explodes the kind of idea of national heritage, but at the same time, it makes it's accessible to everyone. So,
That's wonderful. So, what is the heritage? Who owns it? Yes, and how is it used? If you were to summarize a bit what you are saying.
Yeah, and we got a question from Lavinia, which is, I think, is very pertinent to that.
I'm going to ask it for you, just to also to have it on record for people that do not see the chat. Are there any ceremonies that reinforce the role of the park as a place of memory for the Icelandic nation at the moment?
Okay, so as I said, it became this kind of stage for national festivals. It was the first time, it was in 1874. Iceland got at the constitution from the Danish. So Danish king came to Iceland and gave the Icelanders the constitution. At the same time, Icelanders were celebrating the 1,000 year of habitation in Iceland. So that was the first one. Then second one was in 1930, celebrating the 1 millennium of Alþingi, and then 1944 establishment of. So there were five of these celebrations. The last one was in 2000. That was celebrating 1,000 years of Christianity in Iceland, because Iceland became Christianized in year 1000. It was a total failure. More or less, very few people came, probably because they remembered the festival in 1994, where they got stuck on the roads and couldn't get there. In some ways, the idea of the kind of unification had died in these 6 years from 1994 to 2000. It seemed to be not work. I don't know why. The weather was fantastic in 2000. It was rather lousy in 1994. The entertainment was lousy in both years, so it was not that. So I don't know. I think basically maybe this idea of the kind of unifying celebration is gone. Anyway, we couldn't do it now because we couldn't just throw out all the tourists. There are 5,000-10,000 tourists there every day. And so I think this idea of using Þingvellir as this kind of place of memory for the nation is gone. Maybe because that idea is gone too. That you really cannot imagine one place that kind of unify all Icelanders at the same time. And that is modernity. That is the kind of liquid modernity we live in. And yeah.
Yes, and here is a question that I have. I was making notes about, because it's not just a place, you said, when it's about cultural heritage. If it's place, monument, whatever it is, it's also about the story. It might be that in the past, the story served that society at that moment, but that story might be that in current times doesn't serve it anymore. It could be even understood as a discriminatory story, for instance, like a story that discriminates, that does not include enough. Yeah. So how could we transform these stories for a society that serves without destroying, the past? I don't know. It's very hard to keep the balance, to talk about, cultural heritage as it was, preserved, but also adapted to a modern society with different values that we have probably today. So how do we keep that? What do you think?
I think this is one of the major challenges we are facing all over Europe today. I mean, with rising populism and the idea that we are in some ways, our identity is fixed and there's this either European or national identity that is under threat from people coming in. So I think basically it has exploded. I mean, this doesn't exist anymore. But we have to, at the same time, find ways of belonging to a community without needing these kind of exclusionary symbols. So I think Þingvellir can serve as a we can imagine it as a symbol of democracy, which is a fake. I mean, it's a fiction. Alþingi was not a democratic institution, but the modern Icelandic parliament has the same name, and it is a democratic institution. So of course we can celebrate democracy there, and so we just have to reinvent. We have to tell new stories, not by faking the past, but to use the kind of site as a place for creating new stories that are more inclusive and serve the modern times. And this is what historians are dealing with. I mean, history as a field of study was kind of invented as a biography of the nation, to try to create a kind of fiction that we are all on the same boat. and then history developed into becoming the kind of scientific, I have spent my career kind of exploding the national myths, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we don't have to live in fiction in order to live together. We just have to find ways of finding common kind of ideals that can bind us together from the different cultural backgrounds that we have. So
basically, it's to find the common values and then see what stories serve those common values.
Yeah, and I mean, just telling a symphony orchestra plays with all kinds of instruments that come together in harmony. I mean, that is how society has always functioned, and we just have to find ways of doing that without sacrificing, our kind of sacrificing truth or facts or whatever. I mean, history needs to be doesn't need to be the kind of myth-making business, but yeah.
Yes. And if you agree, we have a last question. We are a bit over the time that we proposed for this podcast, but I will say let's take this last question and then conclude our meeting. So the question is, how are local communities involved in preserving and interpreting the cultural value of the park beyond its role as a tourist destination?
It's a very good question, and this has, as I said before, there is really no local community there, because there was a local community there. There were farms around it, but it was always a fairly poor parish. Very few people lived there, and now it has all been abandoned. So in a sense, it became in many ways a value-free place, because most national symbols are related to some kind of friction. You can see, for example, the American Constitution, which is a symbol of unity in America, but it excluded, both women and slaves. They were not part of they did not have political rights. You can see the French Revolution as a symbol of it's also a symbol of friction. But think what it became, frictionless. There was nothing there, because there were no stories of oppression, or it was kind of unifying symbol in that way, because it was a kind of empty place. But this is rather unusual. Most places are of sites of memory or cultural heritage practices happen in a very particular local communities. So so we really cannot think with it as we cannot generalize from it, because it was all Icelanders thought they had some part in of that heritage. It was always seen as a national heritage rather than a local heritage, because the local community disappeared and still isn't there. So it's owned by the state.
Reykjavik being the closest one, no?
Yeah, so Reykjavik is close. It's owned by the state and has been state property for since the 1920s, and the state sees it as a national. It's a national park with emphasis on the nation. So it's really what has changed is really the nation has changed from being this kind of idea of kind of natural community to becoming a kind of more of a imagined community. So when I started to talk about the Icelandic nation as an imagined community, people thought I was mad or something. A nation is fixed. I mean, everyone knows that we are Icelanders. This is in our genes. I don't think people believe that anymore, not because of me, but just because the nation has changed so much.
Yes. Thank you so much, Guðmundur. I will just conclude here saying that we learn like this. History is serious. That's the advice. Take it serious, because the facts, it matters. The history, the past, it matters. Accept it as it was. good or bad? Is it what happened? We cannot change that. And definitely, as you said, we don't go into the myths and fake news use, and we don't just change the perspective on history. History is there. We have the facts. And if we want to build societies, find the common stories, find the common values that we share, and then see what stories could serve that society. Even could be stories that heal, for instance, heal that past that hurt in the past. I hope I managed to summarize a bit our discussion. It was a delight to have you here and have this discussion together. I want to say thank you everyone for joining the Restory Podcast, our first episode. This podcast, as I told you, is part of the Restory project, which brings together researchers and community developers, experts from 12 European countries and 20 partner organizations. I'm repeating that, but just to make sure for the people that join us later to understand that this is a project led by Paula Beudean University in Cluj-Napoca, Romania, and runs till the end of this year, 2026. More episodes to come here. And we are grateful for the support that we got from the European Union's Horizon Europe program. Thank you, and hope to see you again, everyone, soon.
Thank you very much. And it has been really eye-opening for an Icelanders to be participating in a project that is led by Transylvania, because there are hardly as different communities as these two, and that is always interesting for a historian to experience the kind of diversity of this fantastic place that Europe is. So,
yes. Thank you.